Imad Salem. I am the Vice President of the Texas Progressive Caucus. I tell you, the media, the exposure, letting people know that we have progressives here in Texas. That's the whole message, and I love Progress Texas, and we consider them a sister organization to the Texas Progressive Caucus.
It's Wednesday, July 16, 2025, and this is the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch rapid response on the breaking news stories Texas progressives need to know. I'm Chris Mosier. We could be primed for some all-time high drama in this upcoming special legislative session as Texas Democrats, in consultation with national leadership, begin to weigh their options as their Republican counterparts conspire to try and squeeze more Republican seats out of an already extensively gerrymandered congressional district map. J. David Goodman and Shane Goldmacher at the New York Times say the Dems are considering walking out of the session, which starts Monday, in order to block Republicans from redrawing the state's congressional maps ahead of next year's midterms. Donald Trump has ordered this redraw, as we've talked about, and held his own rally call with Texas Republicans yesterday to press for what not even those Republicans are pretending is not a blatant thumbing of the scale. Gabby Birnbaum and Owen Dahlkamp at the Texas Tribune say the Democrats at both the federal and state level are limited to pretty desperate measures at this point, and breaking quorum would be pretty desperate. Attorney General Ken Paxton is in full attack dog mode already. In his words, Paxton has committed to, quote, hunting down any Democrats who might try to stop the procedure by fleeing. Let's consider that. A guy known for having once had his soon-to-be ex-wife, drive him away from a subpoena summons is now calling Democrats who might strategically make themselves scarce cowards. And it's not every day we come across a brand new political term, but here's one. As we've discussed, the Trib says that trying to over-gerrymander an already very gerrymandered map could backfire into what one might call a dummy mander, a gerrymander that goes so far as to benefit the other party. By moving friendly votes to less friendly districts, those friendly districts get less friendly. A new map attempting to pick up the 5 seats that Trump has demanded would likely force some Republicans in safe seats into more competitive situations. Dallas Congresswoman Julie Johnson says, quote, we're waiting to see how greedy they're trying to be. You know the old adage, a pig gets fat and a hog gets butchered. I think the Texas Republicans are pushing the limits on this one, unquote. David Dayen at the American Prospect expands on the idea of the dummy mander that could end up playing well for the Democrats, noting that the current map is designed for Republican safety, and they'd almost certainly have to weaken their safest seats to pull this off, all at a political moment after the Trump GOP has rammed through a deeply unpopular budget bill and Trump's stupid tariff schemes have started to show up in inflation statistics. Trump's own polling shows his party behind in 28 House battleground districts on the generic ballot, and they're doing even worse among those most motivated to vote. Very interesting stats to study in this Prospect article, which notes that while there's no Republican seat in Texas with less than a 7-point advantage relative to the national ballot, at the same time, there's no Democratic seat in Texas with less than an 11-point advantage. In other words, safe blue districts are safer than safe red districts. So, moving Republican voters into Democratic seats to make those Democratic incumbents more vulnerable could end up hurting Republicans more than Democrats. Dan also mentions that the only 2 real swing seats in the entire state of Texas are those currently held by centrist at best Democrats Henry Cuellar and Vicente Gonzalez in South Texas, due to the surprisingly strong rightward swing we saw down there last year. Well, just so happens that the biggest free health clinic event in the Rio Grande Valley has been canceled for the first time in 26 years due to Donald Trump's federal cuts. Operation Border Health served almost 7,000 RGV folks last year with checkups, dental services, diabetes screenings, and more, says the Texas Tribune. But that ain't happening this year under Donald Trump, who took just over 56% of the vote across the 7 border counties of the RGV last year. Must read stuff linked in the show notes. Back to Ken Paxton, who's not only harassing Democratic lawmakers in advance, he's also back to the election fraud playbook. Andrew Schneider at Houston Public Media writes that Paxton's office says they're investigating more than 100 cases of potential non-citizens voting in 2 recent election cycles, primarily focused on Harris County, naturally, but also looking into Cameron, Eastland, and Guadalupe counties. Paxton, as we know, has a history of making accusations like this, generally targeting black and brown majority areas, rarely with much to show, but plenty to keep Republicans in the legislature giving his office more and more power to intimidate non-white voters in heavily blue areas. There's a lot to read on the ongoing situation with the July 4th flood disaster, primarily centered on Kerr County. All of this in the show notes. First, ProPublica compares and contrasts the insistence of that county's officials that nobody could have seen this flood coming against the long written and oral history of Kerr County that more or less predicts it. Frustrating read that shows a pretty amazing degree of denial among elected leaders there, all Republican, who were charged with keeping people, including hundreds of young children, safe in what they themselves love to call the most dangerous river valley in America. Those officials are polling pretty terribly, too. Tara Suter at The Hill writes that more than half of Americans in a new poll done by The Economist and YouGov agree that, quote, most of the deaths from the flood in Texas could have been avoided if the government had been better prepared. 52% of respondents agree with that statement. These small-town officials forced into a contentious spotlight are getting a taste of what Democratic leaders in our bigger cities deal with all the time, and that's death threats. Nita Golgowski at the Huffington Post says both Kerr County commissioners and Kerrville City Council members have reported fears for their security and have asked Texas DPS for additional protection. One reliable source of mine, who's worked as both the chief of staff in the Texas House for a Democratic lawmaker and for a former mayor of Austin, expressed surprise yesterday that such a thing is new to these MAGA leaders, while over the last decade or so, death threats have become part of your average work week for Democratic officials in Texas. Mario Diaz at KPRC TV in Houston covered the Monday meeting of Kerr County officials where all of that was discussed. It was the first such meeting since the July 4th flood, during which it was also acknowledged that due to an unknown number of people who might have been in the area or near the river for the holiday weekend, it's still anything but clear exactly how many people remain missing. Adding a tragic element to the aftermath is also a building story that officials at Camp Mystic may have inexplicably delayed evacuating their kids from near the river for close to an hour after emergency flood alerts were issued. Peggy O'Hare at the San Antonio Express-News says Jeff Carr, who runs Camp Mystic, has said its owner received a National Weather Service alert on his phone warning of imminent and life-threatening flash flooding, but camp personnel did not begin evacuating children until at least 46 minutes later. That owner, Dick Eastland, who himself died in the flood, didn't sit idle during that time. He was actively assessing the property and contacting other staff members, but it appears that an active evacuation didn't start until 46 crucial minutes had gone by. Another heartbreaking read in the show notes. Speaking of those alerts, we've talked about how the manner in which our phones are used to convey alerts to the point of feeling like a nuisance may have contributed to not many folks paying attention to them at a crucial moment that night. Lucio Vasquez at the Texas Newsroom writes on that. He talked to Jeanette Sutton. She's a professor at the University of Albany who researches crisis communication and emergency warnings. Her research finds that the abundance of notifications competing for people's attention from their phones has weakened the impact of life-saving alerts. Part of the problem is that amber alerts and blue alerts and weather alerts all sound the same and frequently don't apply to the immediate area where they go off, especially in the middle of the night. They've become easy to ignore, a failure of procedure. Once again, all part of 30 years of Republican-dominated public safety policy in Texas. 3 campaign announcements to talk about this morning. The first Democrat to declare a run to replace the aforementioned Ken Paxton at the Attorney General's office comes from Dallas State Senator Nathan Johnson. Taylor Goldenstein at the Houston Chronicle says Senator Johnson, a lawyer and mediator, first elected to the state Senate in 2018 when he flipped a Republican-held seat, says, quote, "It has been so long since we had an attorney general that viewed that office as being the attorney for the people of the state of Texas that I think people don't even have that expectation anymore. One of my goals as attorney general will be to restore people's understanding of and faith in that office," unquote. We also hear that Democrat Marquette Green Scott is planning to repeat her run against Republican U.S. Congressman and full-on MAGA clown Troy Nehls in the 22nd Congressional District, covering the southwest Houston suburbs and stretching down to the coast. Nehls beat Green Scott, taking 62% of the vote in that gerrymandered district last year. Marquette Green Scott is an attorney and a city council member in Iowa Colony, south of Houston. She says she plans to continue building where her 2024 campaign left off. And a Republican primary challenge of note. Gabby Birnbaum at the Texas Tribune says Ultra MAGA State Rep Steve Toth of Conroe has announced a challenge to incumbent and relatively moderate Congressman Dan Crenshaw. And I do mean relatively. In fact, that's Toth's point, that Crenshaw is insufficiently radically right. Look for an attack plan similar to what Steve Toth has repeatedly directed against his fellow Republicans in Texas, including those who dared to impeach Ken Paxton, and on occasion, Governor Abbott himself. Our mission at Progress Texas is to counter the conservative disinformation machine, which is funded by oil and tech billionaires and religious right-wing activist groups, all while fact-based independent media outlets increasingly face threats to their funding. While access to those outlets is frequently free, as it is here at Progress Texas, it takes listener support to keep fact-based independent media going. If you've come to appreciate what we do, now more than ever, we could use your support as a monthly contributor, and no amount is too small. Go to progresstexas.org/donate. Thanks to Charles Zeller, Matthew Wright, and Sarah Aberg, all of whom have joined the team lately. We appreciate all of you very much. That's the Progress Texas Daily Dispatch for this Wednesday, July 16th, 2025. Links to all these original stories can be found in our show notes. Progress Texas is a nonprofit rapid response media organization promoting progressive messages and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. I'm Chris Mosier. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day. We'll see you again tomorrow morning.